For the last couple of sessions, I've been dealing with dispensationalists who have been critical of the preterist interpretation of Bible prophecy. And for those of you who aren't up to speed on what the definition of preterism is, it's simply that when a prophecy is given, it's obviously describing events that are going to take place in the future. So all prophecy is future-oriented. But once a prophecy has been fulfilled, it is in the past, and that's what the word preterist means. You will hear people say that there are more than 300 prophecies in the Old Testament that refer to the first coming of Christ. A Christian would say that those have been fulfilled in the person and work of Jesus Christ. Therefore, on Old Testament passages regarding the person and work of Jesus Christ in his first coming, they would be preterists. A Jew who does not believe that Jesus is the promised Messiah would be a futurist regarding those Old Testament passages that refer to a coming Messiah. Well, in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, but mostly the New Testament, there are further prophecies. Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, Matthew chapter 16, verses 27, 28, 2 Thessalonians 2, the book of Revelation. When Jesus gave these prophecies, or when Paul outlined the prophetic future, say in the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, they were prophecy when they were given. The question is, have they been fulfilled? If they have been fulfilled, then the interpretation of that prophecy today is preterist. That is, they have already been fulfilled. For example, I believe that the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 satisfies what Jesus says in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24. Therefore, when the Gospel of Matthew was written in Mark's version in Mark 13 and Luke's version in Luke 21, when they recorded that prophecy, it was in fact prophecy. It was a description of events that had not taken place yet. Since I believe those prophecies have been fulfilled, I take a preterist perspective on the Olivet Discourse. I do the same for the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation was written prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The book says very clearly that John is told to measure the temple. The temple was still standing in AD 70. It was finally destroyed near the end of AD 70. Therefore, the book of Revelation is describing events that was near to the first readers. That for the time is near, these things must shortly take place. The book of Revelation is very clear about that. If the book of Revelation was written after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, there wouldn't have been a temple to measure, wouldn't have been there. People say, oh, but this is very much like Ezekiel, who is told to measure the temple in Ezekiel chapter 40. This is obviously a description of a future temple. The problem with that interpretation is that Ezekiel isn't the one who measures the temple in Ezekiel chapters 40 and following. It's an angel or some. It just says a man did this. It wasn't Ezekiel. So it was something outside history that this took place. John is the one who was told to measure the temple in Jerusalem. There are still worshipers in there. There's still Gentiles around. This is not a heavenly temple. And since the New Testament doesn't say anything about a rebuilt temple, not a single verse in the New Testament says anything about a rebuilt temple, you can only conclude that the book of Revelation was written prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And we know that the events described in the book of Revelation are to happen soon. And as verse 3 states in chapter 1, because the time is near. You will see the same indicator found in Revelation chapter 22. So that's a prelude to a preterist interpretation of Bible prophecy. And it isn't anything new. It's been around for a very, very long time. Most of the major Bible commentators throughout history have interpreted at least the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24 as referring to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. You'll find Methodist commentators, Baptist commentators, Presbyterian commentators, John Gill, you've got John Lightfoot, Adam Clark, Thomas Scott. There are dozens of commentators who apply the the events of Matthew chapter 24 to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So there's nothing unusual about the preterist interpretation of Bible prophecy. What is unusual, however, is dispensational interpretation of Bible prophecy. There was no history of a dispensational interpretation prior to around 1830. So it's rather amusing to find dispensationalists castigating preterists when they have the longer history. But in the final analysis, it comes down to what does the Bible have to say about these issues. And I've been responding to an article written by Robert Heidler, who's a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary. And in this particular article, he says his primary problem with the preterist view is that it is a blatant example of replacement theology. And his definition of replacement theology comes from Wikipedia, which is rather surprising for someone who's a graduate of Dallas Seminary who's proficient, he claims to be proficient in Greek and Hebrew, is to use Wikipedia. What you really need to do is to actually read what preterists have to say about this in order to come up with a definition. I don't know who wrote the definition in Wikipedia, but it isn't a very good one. Let me read it to you. According to Wikipedia, preterism is a variant of Christian eschatology which holds that some or all of the biblical prophecies concerning the last days or end times referred to events which already happened in the first century after Christ's birth. So far, so good. Because of its claims that Israel was supplanted by the Christian church after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, preterism has sometimes been identified as replacement theology. Well, this is an inaccurate definition of preterism. Preterists I know do not believe that the Christian church supplanted the Israel at all. In fact, Heidler goes on, he's even more indicating here about how bad preterism is. He says, in the preterist view, God has canceled every covenant with Israel. There is no future or significance for the Jewish people or Israel as a nation. There is no fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. There is no reign of Messiah from a throne in Jerusalem. And by the way, you won't find any verse in the New Testament that says anything about Jesus reigning from Jerusalem. You can go to Revelation chapter 20. It says nothing about Jesus reigning on the earth. It says nothing about David's throne being set up in Jerusalem. It says nothing about animal sacrifices, which dispensationalists believe do take place during that 1,000-year period. So this idea of somehow we deny the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant is preposterous. But we do deny that there is a reign of Messiah from a throne in Jerusalem, and the reason we deny it, because the New Testament doesn't say anything about it. Heidler goes on to say all of God's promises to Israel have been nullified according to preterists. Israel has been replaced by the church. Again, that is not the position of preterists that I am aware of. There are some, of course, out there, mostly amillennialists, who do take that position that the church somehow has supplanted Israel. The problem with even framing the argument that way is that the early church was in fact made up of Jews, made up of Israelites. There isn't, and this is part of the problem with dispensationalism. Dispensationalism has created a theological fiction by saying there's one group over here called Israel, another group over here called the church. That is not a biblical view. The church, there's no specialized idea of the church. It's not like it was a word that was made up. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen talks about the church, the ecclesia that was in the wilderness. The church has always been the remnant believers of God. These are the elect. It's not something different from Israel. It is in fact made up of the people of God, Old Testament and New Testament. In tomorrow's show, I want to show you through the book of Acts how every single promise that God had made to Israel had in fact been fulfilled at Pentecost and after. So we'll see you tomorrow when we deal with that particular issue.